April 27th, 1805, First Barbary War. On April 27, 1805, a pivotal moment unfolded during the First Barbary War as United States Marines, in collaboration with Berber forces, launched a daring assault on the Tripolitan city of Derna. This historic event, immortalized in the shores of Tripoli, verse of the Marines' hymn, marked a significant chapter in the early history of the United Marine Corps. The engagements in Derna showcased the tenacity and courage of the Marines as they faced formidable challenges on foreign soil. United in purpose with Berber allies, the combined forces demonstrated remarkable military prowess and strategic coordination. The successful outcome of the assault underscored the commitment of the United States to protest its interests and ensure the safety of its citizens in the face of threats from the Barbary states. 1813. The Battle of York. The Battle of York was a battle fought during the War of 1812. It took place on April 27, 1813 in York, Upper Canada, present-day Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The American forces, led by Major General Henry Dearborn, defeated the British forces led by Major General Roger Hale Sheaffe. The American forces landed on the western shore of Lake Ontario and advanced on York. The British forces were outnumbered and outgunned, and they were forced to retreat to Kingston. The Americans captured York and burned the public buildings, including the Parliament buildings, the governor's residence, and the York Gaol. The Battle of York was a significant victory for the Americans. It gave them control over Lake Ontario and opened up the way for further attacks on Upper Canada. However, the destruction of York also alienated many Canadians and made it more difficult for the Americans to win the support of the Canadian population. 1840. The laying of the foundation stone of the Palace of Westminster. On April 27, 1840, the foundation stone for the new Palace of Westminster was laid. The previous building had been largely destroyed by a fire in 1834. The ceremony was attended by Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and other members of the British government. The foundation stone was laid by the Duke of Wellington, the former Prime Minister. The new Palace of Westminster was designed by Charles Barry and Augustus Pugin. It was built in the Gothic Revival style and is considered one of the most important examples of Victorian architecture. The building was completed in 1852 and has been the seat of the British Parliament ever since. 1861. The suspension of habeas corpus by Abraham Lincoln. On April 27, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the United States. This writ is a fundamental right that allows individuals to be brought before a judge or magistrate to determine whether their detention is lawful. Lincoln suspended the writ in response to the secession of 7 southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War. He argued that the suspension was necessary to prevent Confederate sympathizers from undermining the Union war effort. The suspension of habeas corpus was a controversial decision. Some people argued that it was a violation of the Constitution, while others argued that it was necessary to preserve the Union. The Supreme Court eventually ruled on the constitutionality of the suspension in the case of Ex parte Milligan, 1866. The court ruled that the suspension was unconstitutional because it was not authorized by Congress. However, the suspension of habeas corpus had a significant impact on the Civil War. It allowed the Lincoln administration to arrest and detain Confederate sympathizers, which helped to suppress dissent and prevent sabotage. 1863. The sinking of the Anglo-Saxon. On April 27, 1863, the passenger steamer Anglo-Saxon of the Allen Line collided with a rock off Cape Race, Newfoundland, in dense fog and sank, killing 238 people. The sinking of the Anglo-Saxon was the worst maritime disaster in the North Atlantic to date. The Anglo-Saxon was a British-built steamer that was launched in 1862. She was 2,400 tons and had a capacity of 300 passengers. She was on her way from Liverpool, England to Boston, Massachusetts with a crew of 100 and 238 passengers. On the night of April 26, the Anglo-Saxon was approaching Cape Race, Newfoundland, when she encountered dense fog. The captain ordered the ship to slow down, but she was still moving too fast when she hit the rock. The impact of the collision ripped a hole in the Anglo-Saxon's hull, and she began to sink. The crew and passengers scrambled to the lifeboats, but there were not enough for everyone. 238 people died in the sinking, including 100 passengers and 138 crew members. The survivors were rescued by the British warship HMS Shannon. The sinking of the Anglo-Saxon was a major tragedy and it led to calls for improvements in maritime safety, including the installation of foghorns and the development of better navigation systems. 1865, the Sultana explosion. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana exploded on the Mississippi River, killing an estimated 1,700 people. It was the deadliest maritime disaster in United States history. The Sultana was a former Union troop transport that was carrying 2,300 passengers, most of whom were former soldiers who had been recently released from Confederate prisons. The ship was overloaded and poorly maintained. At around 2 a.m., the Sultana was about 7 miles north of Memphis, Tennessee, when one of its boilers exploded. The explosion ripped a hole in the ship's hull and caused it to sink within minutes. Many of the passengers were asleep when the explosion occurred, and those who survived were forced to swim to shore in the darkness. The water was cold and the current was strong, and many people died of hypothermia or drowning. 1898. Sasano Bay leased territory is placed under German protection. On April 27, 1898, the German Empire officially placed the Katsuzo Bay leased territory under its protection. The territory, which included the city of Singantao, was leased from China for 99 years. The lease was part of a broader expansion of German colonialism in the late 19th century. Germany had already acquired colonies in Africa and the Pacific, and this was seen as a strategic location for the German Navy. The territory was administered by the Imperial Naval Office rather than the Imperial Colonial Office. This was because the primary function of the territory was as a naval base. The lease of this bay was a controversial move. Some people in Germany agreed that it was a violation of Chinese sovereignty, others argued that it was necessary to protect Germany's interests in the region. The lease ultimately lasted until the end of World War I, when it was returned to China.